Federal Open Market Committee minutes from the Federal Reserve's policymaking arm showed that voting members showed wide support for Chairman Ben Bernanke's timeline to scale back the central bank's monetary stimulus efforts, but they reiterated that committee members mostly agreed that a change to quantitative easing was not yet appropriate. Coming to us live from UBS's trading floor in Stamford, Connecticut is U.S. economist Kevin Cummins. Kevin, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So Kevin, are these minutes dovish or are we still set for a September taper?
I think they're pretty consistent with a September taper. And as you mentioned in your opening, the chairman has laid out a timetable that's suggesting tapering later this year. And this afternoon's minutes did nothing to push out expectations that it's not going to happen at some point. It'll eventually come down to the data, but it seems like their base case is the September 18th FOMC meeting.
Now, I know you're not a market strategist, but the S&P did come off a little bit after the minutes released, and then they kind of pared some of those losses. This slight bounce back, I mean, is this just traders trading back and forth, or do you think that maybe they're trying to parse something else from it?
Well, the FOMC statement released on July 31st was interpreted mildly dovish. So the fact that this was probably a little bit more hawkish it did suggest that it's probably a step closer to tapering than the possibility of following through with a more dovish set of minutes. But as all FOMC minutes do show, all participants, there's 19 FOMC officials that take part in the meeting, so it shows a pretty big diversity of views among Fed officials that maybe we saw a little bit of an overreaction initially.
James Bullard voted against the last meeting's actions as he brought up concerns about the Fed's inflation target. Now he voted in favor this time around. Does this suggest that the inflation concerns may have ebbed since the June meeting?
Well, in the spring, if you remember, we did see a slowing in core inflation, and it did start to catch some attention at the Fed. And most importantly, as you mentioned, Mr. Bullard, Mr. Bernanke in speeches and reaction to Bullard's dissent did signal some concern, and he mentioned that he's keeping a close eye on it. But in the more recent months, since May, June, and even into July, we've seen a little bit of a pickup in the core. So that should lend support and give them some conviction that the slowing that we saw in core over the spring is not persisting going forward. And they're expecting that core inflation gradually moves back towards their target of 2%.
Kevin, your prediction then is still for a taper in September?
Yes, it is.
What kind of taper do you think we'll be looking at?
Sure. Well, we do think that because it's September and there's still some members that probably aren't totally comfortable, that they're going to go in very gradual, small steps. So we're looking for an even mix, a cutback in both Treasury securities and mortgage-backed securities of $5 billion apiece. So rather than buying a total of $85 billion a month, they'll go down to $75 billion a month, split evenly.
Yeah, so you do see them coming from both of the categories.
We do. I mean, you can think of it in a few different ways. There's some uncomfortable FOMC members, their views that they shouldn't be buying anything other than treasuries, so perhaps they'll reduce mortgages. But housing is one of the more encouraging aspects of the recovery so far, and you could make the case that if they were to concentrate on reducing mortgages, then you may have a negative reaction to an area of strength in the economy. So I think they'll go in a very small baby step of a combination of the two.
Right. What about GDP in the second half of this year? The Fed says they still do see better growth. Do you guys feel the same way?
We do. We think that growth is more likely to come in closer to 3% than 2%, like you saw in the first part of the year. We are seeing an improvement in the labor market. That's something the Fed has repeatedly announced that's what their main objective is here with their asset purchases, making sure that they're confident that the labor market continues to improve going forward. And we do think that lending standards have eased. That's something that today's minutes did also indicate, that members are more comfortable now in the second half of recovery.
Right.
We're likely to see less fiscal tightening in the second half of the year, and that too is something that most Fed officials repeated in today's minutes.
And finally, Kevin, before we let you go, speaking of payroll growth, is it true that there's too much growth in part-time jobs right now?
Well, that happens when your unemployment is as high as it is, that people who have been out of work are a little bit more willing to take a part-time job than no job at all, or perhaps they'll even follow the labor force. So it is a worry, and it is an area of concern. But as the economy does improve in the second half of this year, and job growth is closer to 200,000 jobs a month, you are likely to see your unemployment rate come down, and that should eventually get those folks who have part-time jobs into full-time work.
All right, Kevin. Well, thanks so much again for being with us. Hopefully next time we'll have a little more to say about tapering, and I'm sure we'll have more discussion about the next Fed chairman.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
For The Street, I'm Joe Deaux.